Hi, welcome back to Paper Labyrinths. My name is Nick,
My name is Brendan.
and we're joined today by Joannes Truyens, an award-winning writer and narrative designer, and his first independently produced work is the sci-fi hypertext game Neurocracy, which invites players to browse the Wikipedia of the year 2049 to piece together a narrative that explores the collision of technology and humanity. Hi, Joannes, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for joining us.
How is your mid-season on Neurocracy? How is it going from your side of things?
I mean, from my side of things, it's going very well. This is the third season, and I feel like with each season, there's less of an opportunity for me to have a burnout. So I think we're doing very well. We're doing very well.
What's funny is I literally just put this together as you said that. Recently, I ran a kind of like long form play by post real time game uh, that Brendan was in, and went about 2 weeks before I was like, I would like to. Part of the reason we stopped is I would like to stop thinking about this every single day
Right.
for many hours a day. So, yeah, I I understand where you're coming from to some degree.
Yeah, I mean, the first season we launched in 2021, the second one in 2023, and the third one is going on now. But that first season, it was so unproven. We were just, grasping in the dark. And then I did, in effect, burn myself out by the end of the 10th episode.
Mhm.
And then the second and the third season just became about mitigating that, just delegating, having an amazing team around me. So yeah, I'm much more relaxed about how things are going now than I was 4 years ago.
Can you talk a little bit about, not to like dig directly into the deepest, darkest parts of game development, but like, I've worked on live service games before, and I've worked on stuff that has seasonal and expansion based content, and I'm really, really curious, particularly, for a release like this that is a living product with such a specific, small, focused team and audience.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit about like what your expectation was going into that, why you felt burned out, and how you adjusted for that? Like, because that is the sort of like agility that I've always craved and haven't been able to because the team is too big or I'm not in a position to like get my hands on the steering wheel in that way. Whereas, you've literally, you are the steering wheel for a lot of this.
Yeah, and I do indeed feel that way. I think it's because the first time we did it, we had no idea what we were doing. There was no one there to tell us otherwise, and we did have
Sure.
that agility because I was the steering wheel. But I think at that time I may have been a bit too precious about the whole thing, so I was reluctant to delegate. I didn't want to. I wanted to have some level of control over every aspect of the experience. So
Hmm.
basically, it was a marathon getting Neurocracy ready for the first episode, and then it was 9 more sprints for the remaining 9 episodes. And so I was just on for that whole time. And in a way, it was worth it because the first season of Neurocracy came together beyond my wildest expectations. I think the audience engagement that we had then, um, not sure we'll ever be able to top that. Season two and currently season three are a bit more mellow in that regard, and in a way, I'm thankful for it. But yeah, that first
Hmm.
season, because it was so unproven, because we didn't know what we were doing, because it was like a niche experimental game where the community aspect, we had no idea what it was going to look like until it was happening.
Right.
So after episode one went out and we saw the speculation, the audience feedback we were getting, we were like, oh no, this is real now. We have to be on
Hmm.
this 24/7 in order to make it work. And I'm glad that I did because that first season came together really, really well. But yeah, it did come at a cost. I burned myself out, and it took me a good long while to bounce back from that. And but yeah, I don't think it would have come together any other way, honestly. So it's very much a balance there.
Sure.
What what is it you're doing behind the scenes week to week? Because I guess so. Just a very quick overview. Neurocracy is a story playing out on an online encyclopedia or Wikipedia, and every week it updates with new articles, and articles get revised, and so on and so forth. What what are you doing week to week? I suppose in a very like straightforward sense, um, because I guess where I'm coming from is it. I've only played it during the third season. I've kind of poked around previously, but I've only like actively paid attention,
Mhm.
very closely recently. It presents very straightforwardly, like, oh, the next week up, and then there's new pages, and I'm going to go read the pages. And it feels like that kind of proverbial duck in the water kind of thing, where behind it all, there's a lot going on, but I can't tell what it is you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, it does take a lot for every episode to come together, but it's sort of tapered off with each season because for season one, um, most of the articles came from me, and then I brought in writers to add their own stories. The Wikipedia medium sort of invited that because the encyclopedic, dispassionate tone of a Wikipedia article is easily mimicked, or at least unified. And the thing about that first season is we had most of the articles written, but not to completion. There were gaps, specific gaps to allow for ambiguity, to basically send it in one way or another, depending on what the community took away from it or the ideas that they were giving us. So the work that comes into it between episodes is looking at what the community is doing, what theories they're coming up with, the ideas they're throwing around, and then incorporating as much of that as possible in each subsequent episode. So trying to find an example. Well, actually, the best example that I can give is that some of the reveals that we had planned for the latter episodes, people guessed them in the first couple of episodes, and that was not a problem. In fact,
It's
it became.
so annoying when people do that. When players,
I know, but in this
when
case,
you're DMing something, you're like, how could you?
it was more of an opportunity because nobody realized that they had hit upon specific reveals. They just existed alongside equally plausible theories because the world of neurocracy is dense enough that it allows for multiple interpretations. So when players started guessing things very early on, guessing things correctly very early on, we took it upon ourselves to sort of increase that ambiguity or just run with it and confirm those revelations earlier and then see if we could come up with new ones towards the latter half of the season, depending on what the community was working with then. So that the TTRPG aspect of it, being a GM, just trying to manage this week on week, depending on what players were giving us, that became sort of the community interactivity that we couldn't really grasp before it was happening. So, and it became so expansive, it became so, in depth that that's why I basically said, okay, I'm just going to have to really focus on this for the next 9 weeks. And then, I mean, the results were amazing. And I think it's because that first season went so well that it provided a very rich foundation for the next two seasons. A lot less work for me was required because the articles I wrote then, I was able to combine with all the ideas and theories that the community gave us. And then for season two, we had sort of like a combination of both, which meant it was a lot of less work for us and yeah, less chance for a burnout.
I didn't realize at all, I think, that the story was in part influenced or dictated is probably not the right word, but that the story was being rewritten in response to community activity or input and that kind of thing. Like, did you anticipate that the story could even have that happen when you went into the project? Like, did you imagine it as almost like a Homestuck style, like I'm going to write the thing and the community is going to react and I am going to react to that? Or had you imagined it as I have a story and I'm going to tell and the community is going to engage with it, but the story is going to remain the same?
Yes.
Okay.
The thing is, it was kind of both because we had written a story where the broad strokes of it were kind of set in stone. We knew where to start, we knew where to end. But the minutiae, the smaller details, they were left up to the player. I mean, that's I think I was influenced by Deus Ex in that way. I mean, Neurocracy takes a lot from that game, but Deus Ex specifically has a pretty linear narrative if you just um, type it out in like a Wikipedia summary. But the details, specific character fates, or which paths you take, they are up to the player. And so for Neurocracy, it was sort of the same setup where the broad strokes were set in stone. We knew what the ending was, even if players guessed it by episode 2 or 3. That guess existed alongside a whole bunch of others, so nobody figured out that that was the ending. And so it became a balance of finding the little moments, the small gaps where players could decide what the story was going to look like, and then affirming that in next episode. It was actually a lot of fun to see players to see their theories reflected back at them, to see in the next episode, like, oh, I guessed that, and now it's there. That was always a lot of fun for them. So we doubled down on that and made sure that as soon as a player guessed something beforehand, or maybe even added something that we hadn't anticipated, that we would reflect it back at them in each subsequent episode, which from the feedback we were getting on Discord anyway, they were getting a lot of satisfaction from that.
How receptive, or no, that's not really the right way to put it, but like, is there a line somewhere when the community, because if you look at the forums, people are talking and theorizing, and then they're also just straight up asking, hey, can we get an article on this character or this event or whatever, right? Where is the like, we'll do that or we won't do that kind of decision being made? Because it's a really interesting, I don't think you'd want to, or maybe this is me, I wouldn't say like every time someone asks for something, I'm going to go write that article and give the answer to them. Like, there might be sometimes where it's productively useful to refuse the request or quietly ignore it or whatever. But where does that kind of, like, what's your, I suppose, strategy in that sort of interaction week to week or even across seasons?
Well, the thing is, we keep it mostly opaque in the sense that we don't communicate when exactly we take a player's suggestion or change something based on what they're giving us. So I do think a lot of that process takes place in the player's head. They craft a narrative for themselves, and then sort of we can get in the middle of that process, but it's not always explicit what exactly we are deciding in the moment. So it's less that we have a specific process for that, and it's more that we're just figuring it out in the moment. A lot of vibes
Mhm.
based storytelling. Um, Again, very TTRPG based. And one comment that I get a lot is that people ask me, like, okay, what TTRPG or GMing experience do you have to, tackle something like Neurocracy? And then I always say, well, nothing. I've never even played a TTRPG. I've never GM'd one or been part of one. I just sort of fell ass backwards in this format from the premise of using Wikipedia as a medium for a story. And then the community aspect sort of organically grew from that without my ever intending it to work like that. It just sort of kind of happened, really.
What I want to dig at that for a second. If you've never played a TTRPG, what do you feel like is the connectivity between what that is doing and what Neurocracy is doing?
It's more, well, the term that I like to use is a TTARG, where it's sort of
Okay.
like more an alternate reality game
Mm-hmm.
where a community comes together to find clues and debate theories and create resources for each other. But in this case, there is a GM in the development team, and we just sort of look at that process, see what's happening, and then hopefully, or in this case, genuinely foster some kind of interactivity where players feel that their theories are leading up to something, that they're being reflected back at them. So, in that sense, I think the TTRPG aspect sort of comes to the fore with Neurocracy, but it doesn't come from any specific experience that I have. And calling it a TTARG only came in during the second season, because during the first season we were still discovering what it was in the moment. So yeah, if when it comes to specifically how TTRPGs work, I think you might have more of an idea of that than I do.
Well, no, I mean less how TTRPGs work. I meant more like that was a term you introduced to say like, yeah, it
True.
kind of works this way. I just wanted to see if there were particular details about that. Talking more about process, like to circle back to a little bit of what Nick was getting at, like as I gestured at before, you have a relatively small team and you have a focused story that you want to tell, even if that's an adaptive, crowdsourced kind of thing. And really, really early on, you hit on this idea of like we're going to tell this story through the interface, an interface that replicates Wikipedia, right? How do you decide what gets an article and what doesn't? Because when I think about Wikipedia, I think about a gigantic encyclopedia, literally, of like so much that's out there within the world, and obviously you can't write a bunch of stuff to reflect everything that exists in the 2049 that you are simulating. And in
Mhm.
fact, you've said in other stuff, we're very, very deliberately not going to write like, here's the article on China, and here's all of the information you'd expect to find in the article on China, even if Omnipedia was, the true successor to Wikipedia that it would be. But at the same time, you do have to decide to write some articles, and I was really curious what your process is for like figuring out this deserves an article and this will get an article later, or this doesn't get an article.
That was mostly decided beforehand with some leeway when the live campaign went underway. But yeah, the thing about not having an article for China, that's sort of an internal rule that we had that if an article exists on Wikipedia, it cannot be replicated on Omnipedia. That was one of the rules that we did have for ourselves because there would be some overlap and I can't really expect players to dig into all of that. Like, if we did have an article on China, we would have to have its entire history replicated, which the future of 2049 wouldn't really affect. We would just, to have it be a realistic article of China, we would have to have all of that content and then expecting all players to take all of that in was a bit much. So the rule was no articles on Omnipedia that already have an equivalent on Wikipedia. And that's why we have the system of like little pop-up previews where you can hover over a term and it just gives you a couple of lines, which honestly that didn't it took us a while to get to that idea. One of the first versions of Omnipedia would actually link out to Wikipedia if it was an article about China or a disease or something that existed in the real world. And that was going to be our approach pretty close to release. But the issue there was that it made Omnipedia dependent on an external source of information. And it took players out of the year 2049 and back into the present day. And then for one of the um, designers that I spoke with came up with the idea like, oh, well, Wikipedia has this little thing, has this functionality where you can hover over a link and get a couple bit preview. Maybe you could use that. And that just, everything fell into place with that because it solved the issue of having to replicate a link filled Wikipedia page while not having to write an article for each one. And it means you can adapt a real world subject to the future. For instance, the little pop up on the United States says that there's only 45 states now, and we don't have to explain why. We don't have to write that article. We can just let players guess or speculate as to, okay, what happened to those 5 states? And then it also became a great way to avoid signposting what matters and doesn't matter to the world of neurocracy because as the episodes progress, some of these previews will turn into real articles. So at first, you have no idea which ones are going to become important, which means that players attach equal value to everything, even if it's not connected to the main murder mystery or whatever direction takes the interest of the player. So using those little previews basically solved a lot of problems that we were having and offered a lot of narrative opportunities. And then in terms of deciding which fictional concepts of the world of neurocracy got articles. It was more a case of writing the articles that we had in mind and then seeing which concepts we had come up with in the moment were expansive enough or had enough, flesh on their bones to warrant an article. Otherwise, we just kept it to a preview pop-up.
I like the preview pop-ups aesthetically because it does give you that like the link filled Wikipedia article is a kind of like aesthetic that everyone understands at this point, right? And it gives it's sort of like a gives like a density to like a perceived density to the world, that like, oh yes, there's all this stuff, you could all link to it. But what I do find interesting is that it does contain like neurocracy to like the Omnipedia website, right? It's not quite an ARG in I guess a broader sense, and like, oh well, there's like books with clues and websites with clues, and like every the fantasy of an ARG is it's all around you, and you just have to open your third eye and like see all the clues in the world. Which I don't think is like good or bad that neurocracy isn't that. It's one way or the other. I think it is, but it's a very interesting set of constraints. And I totally understand, like, yeah, from from a point of view of like, do you want to go and plant all this stuff out in the world and so on and so forth. But I found that a really interesting distinction between neurocracy and just generally ARGs. And I don't know if there's another. I don't think I've heard of an ARG that does something similar to this, where it is like quite like limited in its, I don't know, perception or something like that.
No, that's yeah, and I'm happy that you picked up on that because it's definitely something we went for. My eternal belief is that limitations breed creativity, and limiting ourselves to the space of Omnipedia and just not allowing the story to take place outside of that, but everything is contained within this platform, I think helped us to sort of direct the experience. Because, and also it's a matter of imposed limitations in the sense that we were a small team. So the idea of expanding the world into other websites or books or real life storytelling was a bit too daunting for us as a small team. But ultimately, using only the canvas of Omnipedia to tell this story became sort of an ideal like limitation for us to work with. And even within that, we limited ourselves to using only the tools and systems that Wikipedia has. So that's why the article previews are there. That's why the revision history is there. But anything on top of that, anything that Wikipedia doesn't have, but that seemed interesting for us to use here, we didn't do that. We just went with only what Omnipedia offers, and I feel like that sort of made it a more interesting space to explore with the knowledge that it is so self-contained.
I'm trying to think how like there's I appreciate the degree to which I really like the idea of the medium of like this is a wiki and it can do the things that the wiki can do. I'm curious about functionality that Wikipedia has that Omnipedia doesn't. That and I'm curious like what your rubric was for deciding that's a thing that they can do. We're not going to allow that. Like um, going back to this idea of like completely fictional concepts. I'm not expecting there to be an article for China or anything like that, but there are characters within the world that very clearly have like weight and importance and relevance to like what's going on that don't have articles and stuff like that. And so as a player, that makes me think, oh, that's interesting. This person is important, but not important enough to merit an article. Let me go search about them. Let me see what I can find out about them. Have they been erased or something like that? And I'm curious, like, what your determination was for Wikipedia behaves like this. We're going to behave like this, and we're going to try and bridge the gap despite having, a much smaller subset of articles that aren't necessarily all related to the ongoing mystery. There's enough there to like say, here's some other things that are going on within the world that maybe they're related, maybe they're not. Um, I guess I'm curious. You're emulating something that, by its very nature, should feel very big, and you're very very deliberately making choices to make it feel very small.
And most of that is just to make it manageable for players, because the wider, the more expansive our version of Wikipedia gets, the more players are expected to take in. And we did want to keep it as contained as possible in order not to overload them, because in a sense, there's very little hand-holding or tutorializing when it comes to neurocracy, and that's by design in the sense that we're all familiar with how Wikipedia works. So if we mimic it as closely as possible, then the grammar of interaction is already known to players and we don't have to educate them or like tell them how to play it. The exception to that is that Omnipedia has an article on Omnipedia. And if you visit that, you sort of get a sense of how the site works in universe in the year 2049. And that is something that can tell you, okay, what do I have to pay attention to? Where does the bias of this world creep in? What can I trust and not trust? When it comes to systems that Wikipedia has that Omnipedia does not, that was sort of more an evolution in the sense that we were limited for the first season, in the sense that all the community interaction took place on Discord. What we wanted to do was create a forum, because Wikipedia has talk pages where editors can debate with each other, like, okay, how do we write this page, or how do we document a current event? And that's something that we also wanted to replicate, but given the limitations of the first season, we just didn't have time and means to do that. So we put everything in Discord. For the second season, we did have the opportunity to do that. So we built a forum into Omnipedia and put all the speculation there. And players really not only embraced that space, but really started role playing as editors from the year 2049, taking in all the detail of this world and just talking about it as if they were in that world, which surprised me incredibly, because there was really no prompting for them to do that. They just naturally started behaving as if they lived in that world, and thereby expanding it, thereby helping us write it. So that's the reason why we limited Neurocracy to Omnipedia to that extent, because I feel like it sort of invites players to, how do I put this? It's more, it gives them the knowledge that, hey, everything takes place here. You don't have to worry about what happens out there. So please don't feel overwhelmed. You're familiar with this space. You know how Wikipedia works. You know how to jump from link to link. You know what random article does. So trusting players to find their own way into the possibility space of Neurocracy was always sort of the plan. And honestly, I think confusion, especially initially, can be a good thing. Like everything, movies, games, books, they're all trying to be so safe. They're all trying to immediately explain what's going on so as not to confuse the audience. And I always feel like, why are you doing that? Confusion is good. It sets up mystery. It sets up questions that might get answered. Anytime I see a movie with an opening crawl or a monologue, I'm sure that was added because one test audience member was confused and they were like, no, we can't have that. So I feel confusion can be a good thing if properly managed, if, introduced at the start and then gradually remedied. So that was sort of that approach for Neurocracy.
Was the website or the story, was it ever conceived of as being like completely pre-written? Because things are broken out week by week with updates and so on. But I'm imagining, and like just in comparing to other database games where the whole story is like there, and you have maybe some limitations on how you can see, or like how you access information is limited in various ways, but it's all there. Was that part of like an initial idea of like, here's the entire website, it's all here, there's dozens and dozens of pages, instead of the opening few weeks being like a very constrained funnel to what's going on, basically?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the initial plan, once we hit upon the idea of using Wikipedia as a medium to tell this story, or at least communicate this story world, was that you would come in after the fact, everything has happened, you have immediate access to all the articles, and then you can just dive in, and the the problem with that approach was that what would stop players from hitting random article and immediately finding the article with the answers? So it became a question of how do we gate
Well, so
information?
is there an article with the answers then? I guess I bet that kind of
Congratulations.
that's not what I've expected to.
I mean, yeah, in that
Not,
version,
I'm not saying like you're doing it wrong. I'm just like I just literally don't know if that's the case.
the way we had envisioned the story at the time that was the approach we were taking, that you had the whole uh the complete breadth of Omnipedia in one go, and then you have to sort of go article by article to piece together what happened, came at a time when, yeah, there would have been an article that just had the answer in it. So then it became a
Is
question for
that?
us. Yeah.
I was so sorry. Is that like? I'm sorry to dig into this because I'm really fascinated. Is that because you are kind of taking the conceit of Wikipedia in the sense that like, well, this is what happened, and I know you're not like saying everything written on the page is true, even fictionally. I know there are things, but like there being an article, I guess I would have expected like, oh, even after I read all of it, I'm still left open. Like I've had through some questions, but some big or small details are very left open to me. Was that kind of result? What was that downstream from previous decisions in general, or just because that's how you ended up? That's how you want the story to end up, in a sense.
Honestly, we were kind of discovering it in the moment.
Yeah, and that's that's totally fine. Yeah.
But it's interesting that you mentioned that, because there is a murder mystery at the core of Neurocracy's narrative, and it
Mm.
does start with a very simple question. Who is Adira? Like Adira, Adira. Adira is the name of some type of entity that's responsible for the assassination that opens the story. And that's the question that does drive a lot of the player speculation. Like, okay, who is Adira? We do make that kind of explicit. And because it's such a specific question, it does have a specific answer that we initially had as part of an article. And if you immediately had everything available to you, you could hit random article or just chance upon it some other way. And then it became a question like, okay, how do we make this question more intriguing? And then came the idea of using the revision history of Wikipedia as sort of like a way to have episodic content, to gate information. And even then, we changed. Even the articles themselves remained pretty unchanged as these episodes progressed, but we did change the order a lot of when specific articles were dropped, and when the answer to the question of the murder mystery was revealed. And the thing is, what we did in the second season, when we did have the forum, because the forum enabled all the player speculation to become a part of Omnipedia. It was no longer on a Discord somewhere, it was part of Omnipedia. You could click to the talk pages from each article. So in order to fully make use of that functionality, we decided to run the murder mystery the same way as in the first season, except this time when we gave players the answer to the question of who is Adira, we only kept it up for like a little while, knowing players would archive it on the forum, and then we deleted it from Omnipedia. And the result is that the answer to the murder mystery is now in the hands of players. It only exists on the forum alongside other interpretations and theories that players have been debating. So now it's not even sure whether that's the right answer or not. And that was, again, a happy accident of the whole plan to take all the amazing speculative work from the first season and incorporate it into Omnipedia. So that's sort of, if there is a degree of intentionality to how Omnipedia works, odds are we were just figuring it out in a moment and deciding like, yeah, that's pretty cool. Let's go with that.
Mm.
Many such cases.
Unfortunately,
Yeah.
yeah, I find that really that's just such a strange problem to try to solve.
I imagine playtesting.
Especially,
Playtesting this was like a real like. I don't know. I'd be sweating bullets putting this in front of someone, being like, "Here, try this,"
Oh,
and
absolutely.
yeah,
I mean, the playtesting also sort of organically happened because we had pitched it to publishers here and there, and we didn't get any traction there. But we did get the advice that Neurocracy would be an interesting project to self-publish, and then we decided to go the Kickstarter route, and then we approached a marketing agency to help us put together a Kickstarter strategy because I don't know how to Kickstarter. So their strategy involved, because they were having as much trouble as I was trying to pitch this thing, or at least trying to find a very concise elevator pitch, they didn't really know how to position it. And ultimately, they advised us, like, look, the best way to approach this is to just put it in players' hands, let them decide what it is, and see how it comes back to you. And that's ultimately what we did, because I have to get the years right. In 2019, I submitted a very small version of Omnipedia, which had like 3 episodes and only one story arc in it, to Intro Comp, which is like a little offshoot of IF Comp, where people can upload like the start or at least some chunk of their interactive fiction game, and then have the jury play it. So I submitted Neurocracy to that, and it got great feedback, even in its very, very small early form. And then when this marketing agency came back to us with a strategy for Kickstarter, they said, look, we can't just start a Kickstarter and expect there to be a bunch of people to start pledging. You need to build a community months beforehand. So their idea was then create this demo put this demo into episodic chunks, start on a Discord, and then that actually became an accidental playtest. We were only trying to put together a community for the Kickstarter, and then they went to town on this demo, speculating theories between these 3 small episodes, and that more than anything told us like the possibility space that Neurocracy provide in that sense. And that's why I keep saying we sort of fell ass backwards into all these ways that Neurocracy works, because we didn't really plan that. It just sort of happened while trying to get a community primed for the Kickstarter.
People love diving around on lore wikis, right? I find it very, I don't know, strangely ironic that Neurocracy is like looped back on in multiple meta ways on like what a lore can be, because it's like, well, you could imagine a video game that Neurocracy is the lore of, and then your video game could have little lore snippets, and then the wiki fills it out, but then now your wiki has the little info lore snippet boxes as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going anywhere with this. I just find it funny. I find it funny that I guess even like a lore wiki also replicates the kind of formal structures of video game lore sometimes, or at least you found it pragmatically useful to do so in a sense. You could write it all, but obviously not.
I mean, that's kind of again how it happened accidentally, in the sense that when it comes to writing, world building is absolutely my favorite part, and Neurocracy sort of a way for me to just do that. Like, can I present the lore of a world to players and have them put together the story based on the details they find? I think one way to describe it is like it's the iceberg metaphor, where the story you experience is at 10% above the water, and it's all supported by the 90% you don't see, which is all the character biographies, the world details that all inform the story, but they're not necessarily made explicit. And Neurocracy is sort of an inversion of that, where we give you the 90% below the water, and then depending on which details intrigue you, you put together the story, you tell the story to yourself. And that's sort of a way for me to be able to indulge my love of world building in just presenting this wall of text, this lore dump, and make it like the actual gameplay mechanic of the thing.
Now, saying that it's basically like lore dump the game has clicked so many things into place for me. That's
there you go.
That's really enviable in its way,
I also want to clarify, when you said lore dump, I made a face because my upstairs neighbor started hammering something, not because I dislike the idea of lore dump, but it was very poorly timed.
Yeah.
But
you'll hear it on my track.
There is a lot of...
You said lore dump and every cat in the neighborhood started screaming. That's why I made that face.
I feel like every couple of months the lore discourse rears its head around again, and it's like, just lore is not story. You need characters. You can't just lose yourself lore. And I'm like, okay, but lore is also a valid storytelling tool, and just using it on its own accord, I think has value. And I love lore. I'm the kind of guy, I'm the kind of person if
Well, I
I
think
see a
it's
new
very
if
weird.
I see a newspaper in a movie, I'll pause to read it, see what effort they put into it. Is it lorem
Yeah.
Totally.
ipsum?
Yeah.
Is it lorem ipsum, or did someone go to the trouble of writing that? And I feel like if someone wrote that article, like, to satisfaction, that tells me something about the care and effort that was put into this world.
Well, have you are you do you take part in the time honored practice of buying RPGs to read the book but not actually play them? Because before this conversation, I would have said, "Oh yeah, Joannes is a guy who has a stack of RPG books, reads them all cover to cover like I do, and then plays one out of every 20." Because that is essentially the practice that you're recreating, but kind of retransformed through an interface of Wikipedia instead.
I mean, you would think that, but no. It actually comes
You
more
should.
from.
Here, I'm gonna recommend to you right now. Go get some RPG books and flip through them because you will really enjoy the experience of like, ooh, here's 30 pages of a 2,000 year timeline for this setting. This
Ooh,
completely fictional
tell me about
setting.
the Blood War. I gotta use the
Yeah,
Blood War.
and the age of heroes, et cetera, et cetera.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because there is something similar that led to me making Neurocracy, and is that manuals of games in the 90s were so expansive. There
Yeah.
were separate booklets to the like, in that huge case, and those I would read independent of the game. I think I've
Hmm.
mentioned that one of the specific examples is the manual for Sin, the 1998 shooter that was completely
Mm-hmm.
eclipsed by Half-Life. But because I only played
Hmm.
Half-Life a year after it came out, I focused on Sin first, and that game had a manual where the first 30 pages were basically the diary of the protagonist, John Blade, and it just sketched so much of that world of Freeport City, of the year 2035, of what it looked like. And I was so engrossed by that I would read it again and again, independently of the game. There's a lot of other ones, like I remember the Halo manual was very influential as well, because it had like these little snippets of text, like describing what a needler is, or the Cole Protocol. What is that? And it just was so intriguing that even outside of the game, I was pulled into that. And I think ultimately all of that came together when I played Deus Ex, which is the game that most influenced Neurocracy, in the sense that I love Neurocracy. I love Deus Ex for a lot of reasons, but the most is that the near future setting was so intriguing to me that I would explore each level, every corner of it, so I could find more data cubes, more computers to hack, because I wanted to learn more about this world. And just knowing the storytelling potential of like a simple email that describes what a character is doing was just so engrossing to me, that I think that led to me realizing the strength of just putting lore front and center and having players engage with that, even if I didn't realize it at the time that that was what was happening.
I do feel like games lost that paratext
Absolutely,
capability,
yeah.
and that's sort of like that void was sort of involuntarily recreated with the lore wiki.
Hmm.
Yeah, there was something exciting about either getting, buying, or, as was more often the case for me, renting a game and getting this like multimedia experience of like, I'm going to get a few pages that tell me like not just what the controls are, but what this world is like. I'm going to get
Why is this guy named John Blade? That's kind
I'm
of a
going to get the
silly name, but
concept art as the portrait and all that kind of thing. I loved that stuff. And I felt badly cheated whenever I would open up a thing and it would have an advertisement for a different game that the publisher had made instead of a. Giannis, if you don't have stacks of RPGs sitting around, what kind of books do you have sitting around in stacks?
Oh, a lot of science fiction. Mostly, I'm sort of very my I read mostly science fiction, so I think that's also sort of the synthesis of Neurocracy, and that science fiction is my go-to genre. It's what I enjoy the most, and most of the
what's
books.
your most recent? What's like top of the list right now on recent science fiction?
The book that I enjoyed the most recently is Where the Axe is Buried by Ray Naylor. It's sort of a book, near future dystopia. It's about the surveillance state and how people like live in it and try to escape it. And yeah, it's just it's jealousy-inducing prose. It's like the exact type
Mm.
of world, near future dystopian scenario that I enjoy, but it's rendered in such evocative prose that I know I cannot write, which is why I make Neurocracy the lore Bible that it is. But it's just such an amazingly written book that says so much about our present moment. And
Mhm.
like Ray Naylor, I discovered him from his book The Mountain and the Sea, which is about this colony of evolved octopi that is discovered somewhere and then analyzed, and they do seem to have some level of culture, education, maybe even sentience, and that becomes the central question of the book. But it's again rendered in such amazing prose that yeah, Ray Naylor is has recently become uh, like a writer that I really really enjoy.
Yeah, I have not heard of. I don't think I've heard of him at all, or the works, I guess. So.
Yeah, but if I look back, then the most influential writer when it comes to neurocracy was Michael Crichton,
Oh,
because he had sort of the brand of techno thriller that sort of
Neurocracy didn't start with dinosaurs, and then they slowly got edited out. Surely, okay, fine. You're shaking your head.
well, there is a lot of ways in which dinosaurs influenced neurocracy.
Sure.
Because one way, like to have a very specific example, is the book Jurassic Park. I read it after the movie, and it's interesting the way that the book is so expansive and dives into so many different things that were, of course, simplified or omitted for the movie. But one thing that the book does that really influenced me at the time was it has a very different way to reveal that the dinosaurs on the island are breeding, which in the movie is when Alan Grant and the kids stumble upon a nest with broken eggs, and then they mention like, oh, they have
Yeah.
frog DNA and they can change sex, and that's how that's revealed in the movie. But in the book, that reveal actually happens much earlier. And make sure I get it right here. There's still no dinosaurs have escaped yet. They're just still going around the island. And then they talk about the system that they have in place to sort of ensure that no dinosaur can leave the island. And it's sort of this AI camera based system that counts the dinosaurs at each interval. And I remember the number. It's 253 dinosaurs that have been introduced to the park. And so they're very confident. They're like, yeah, no dinosaurs have escaped because the number keeps coming up as 253. And then Alan Grant just goes, can you raise the number? Can you put it to 254? And they're like, whatever. And then they raise it and then it counts up to 254. We have one extra velociraptor. Where did that come from? And then they raise the number to like 1,000 and it keeps counting and it keeps counting and it keeps counting and it stops somewhere at like 300 and change. But that moment, I remember reading that and it just so really hit me that this was just something that they hadn't considered how this technology works, or they haven't even considered that we were looking so hard at animals escaping that we weren't looking at more animals being there. And I remember the way that sort of used like, sci-fi technology, computer science to create a reveal. I think that more than anything influenced sort of my approach to science fiction in general and then hard science fiction specifically. And then in the second book, The Lost World, also wildly different from the movie, there's this whole dramatic question of why the dinosaurs on this other island are so aggressive. They're not acting like they're supposed to. They're incredibly like hostile. They're acting very strange, and that becomes a question throughout the whole book. And in the end, it's revealed that it's because they were feeding these dinosaurs uh, sheep meat that was infected with scrapie, which is a prion disease. And prions are
Mm.
neurodegenerative, and that's why the dinosaurs were all acting weirdly and ultimately doomed to extinction. And the concept of prions just influenced me, like impressed me so much that now they are a cornerstone of Neurocracy's world building because it is about a pandemic born of a prion disease. So yeah, Michael Crichton,
Mm.
more than anyone, is to blame for Neurocracy existing the way it does.
Is there other? Because Crichton is very widely, or has a lot of broad work. Is there other Crichton works? Because like, is Westworld influential, and maybe or maybe
I,
not?
I was
But
gonna I was gonna guess Disclosure. Disclosure is like an erotic
I don't know
thriller,
this at all.
but it has a lot of like corporate like secrets in computer security type stuff going on.
Disclosure,
Um,
yeah, definitely that
yeah.
one. Rising Sun, because it had a
Right.
lot to say about
Yeah.
Japan, and I was sort of leaning towards incorporating China into the world of neurocracy.
Hmm.
A Case of Need is Crichton's first novel, which he wrote because he was a medical doctor at the time, and he put that into his story. The Terminal Man is about someone who has a brain implant and starts hacking it. Of course, also very influential to neurocracy, which
Hmm.
deals with brain-computer interfaces. And another one is Prey, which is about nanotechnology.
Nanomachines. Yeah.
Exactly, and
Hmm.
that also has such an interesting way of setting up the rules of how these nanomachines work and then playing around with them. So even it results in sort of twists that are surprising yet inevitable. That once they happen, you're like, of course, that's the only way it could have happened, but it's still a surprise to you. So that's the kind of foreshadowing revelation structure that I've always tried to set up in my stories, where it is science based, it establishes rules, it makes sure that when things happen, they're not just, coming out of left field. You don't just change the rules of a science fiction universe in order to make a dramatic moment happen, because I feel like that robs the dramatic moment of its impact if you even, if you think about it in the moment. So yeah, I think um Michael Crichton's work, starting with Jurassic Park and expanding from there, really influential. I think he kind of lost me with, I think it was called State of Fear, his book where
Yeah.
he sort of suddenly reveals himself as a climate change skeptic and then just,
Yeah.
snowballed from
Oh,
there.
really? Oh,
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
all news to me. Oh
Prey
no,
was where he started to lose me, but he really revealed himself to be like deep in the
that's
sauce with State
unfortunate.
of
Hmm.
Fear. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
I'll I've had the desire to do a Crichton podcast. I'm sure that'll happen at some point in my life. There's
That would be a good project.
yeah,
I will happily
because
be a guest on this podcast.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Like you, he was a very like I love Jurassic Park. I read the book before the movie actually, and so I was expecting the movie to be a lot grislier than it was, and so for certain scenes I got up and left the movie theater because I didn't want to see
you
the
just know
level of
Spielberg
viscera.
just loves the
He
grizzly
loves
shots too. You
viscera.
can't just shock
Yeah,
Steve over here.
Spielberg goes for the gross out every single time. Um, but I remember my dad's word processor. I set up every single computer interface that was in the Jurassic Park book
Hmm.
and like replicated it in the word processor. But obviously you couldn't put in commands, and so I was just like go to page 4 if you were like putting in that command to go to that screen. Um,
That's very
um,
cute.
but yeah, from there I sort of like went, oh, he's written a bunch of other stuff. I should go read that stuff, even though it doesn't have dinosaurs in it. And that was sort of my entry into like going from young adult to quote unquote adult literature. Which is it's techno thrillers. It's gripping stuff, but it's the stuff that you read on like an airplane ride. You know what I mean? And so like it was very very formative for me in terms of like, oh, this is a guy that is like not only capable of setting up a character and setting up a dramatic situation, but is interested in talking about like technology and the things that can influence dramatic situations like that. Like Rising Sun dealt with spoilers for Rising Sun. What year did Rising Sun come out? Rising Sun was like 80. Uh, 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 I don't know, somewhere in there. Spoilers for Rising Sun. Rising Sun involves the newfangled technology of editing video, so it looks like someone is doing something
Oh
that they weren't
no.
actually doing. Which, like, at the time,
I
is like, well, that's
what a
impossible.
strange science.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whoa,
There's no way that
misinformation.
technology could do that. And here we are, 2025. Our entire world is ruled by videos that make people look like they're doing things that they aren't actually doing. It's my
Now,
favorite kind of
if
thing to share on the internet.
if we are doing a bit of a deep dive on Crichton, there's one other aspect
Sure.
that was formative. I also really loved the Andromeda strain in the sort of the stakes in the situation that it set up. And I remember spoilers for the Andromeda strain.
Hmm.
Um, it's about a bunch of
You're talking
scientists.
to me directly because I haven't read any Crichton books. Go ahead.
The Andromeda strain is about scientists who are contained within a facility and they have to study this extraterrestrial virus. I say virus, it's not virus, it's like some specific compound. But at the end of the book, this virus is about to escape, and they have to stop this automatic nuclear bomb from going off, that which would, destroy the area and clean out this virus. But in this case, the virus feeds on energy, so setting off a nuclear bomb would, you know, give it so much energy to
Magnify
work
it.
with. And I remember thinking that was such an exciting setup. But then when I read about the book, the editing process, apparently Michael Crichton had initially written it as one of the scientists has to go and enable this nuclear bomb to go off. And then the editor was like, wouldn't it be more interesting to have this bomb automatically start the countdown and then the scientist has to go turn it off? And Michael Crichton apparently was like, oh, yeah, right. That makes a lot more sense. Thank you so much. And that, to me, sort of indicated sort of the power of just editing and
Yeah.
letting your story just be seen through other people's eyes and come back to you, because they'll see things
Mhm.
that you didn't, and you think your ending might be the best yet, but there's always a better version.
I love that. It's like, well, how about you turn this book into a techno thriller instead of whatever it was before by just changing this one detail that gives everything a lot more stakes.
Exactly. If one detail can change everything to that extent, I was like, yeah, that was also very informative
Yeah.
for me.
Did you know there's a sequel to the Andromeda Strain?
I did know that. I haven't read it, but it wasn't him that wrote
It's
it,
not
right?
by
It was like
Crichton.
someone
Yeah, yeah.
else, I think.
Daniel Wilson. I don't know this guy.
The most recent Crichton work I've engaged with is the Great Train Robbery film with Sean Connery.
That's a great
and Donald
movie.
Sutherland. It's a great movie.
Yeah.
He's on that train. It's going 15 miles an hour, but he's on that train.
I mean, if I was going to stand on top of a train, I would want it to be going 15 miles an hour.
Yeah.
Did you ever read his autobiography Travels?
No, I did not.
I read that, I was 13, but I read it like 5 or 6 times, even though he professes interest in the healing power of crystal pyramids and stuff like that. I was like, well,
Okay.
all right.
Yeah, even then, the cracks were showing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You get I think if you have a certain amount of money, that your brain begins to break in some pretty fundamental ways. That's me apologizing. Maybe he was always that way. I don't know. But then again, he went to med school. He should know that crystals don't work.
I mean, if you don't have anyone around you to tell you no, of course your brain is going to degrade
Yes,
that way.
exactly.
And I feel like the more influence he gained after Jurassic Park, and he could just write his books the way he wanted to, maybe even, not have editors anymore. It's like, okay, yeah, well, that's not great. You need people around you. And that actually is an interesting little segue to like the third influential pillar for neurocracy, because I mentioned Deus Ex, I mentioned Michael Crichton, and the third one is basically James Cameron, in the sense that my journey into sci-fi started with The Terminator. Not even the movie. It was my dad who told me the plot of The Terminator.
My dad, James Cameron.
As a bedtime story. No, and I remember that part more vividly than I do watching the movie for the first time. But that sort of started my appreciation for James Cameron's work, his sci-fi sensibilities. And I mention it because I also believe James Cameron is currently in a position where no one around him says no, and that gave us Avatar. So
So who's to say if it's good or bad?
Exactly.
Did your dad
a lot of people
tell you that he was telling you the story of Terminator, or did he take credit for Terminator?
I think he did specify, hey, this is a movie that you might watch later in life. But yeah, I just remember
you can't watch it
vividly.
Right now. Okay.
Yeah.
I think I did see it way too early, but again, I appreciate it for that fact, because I mean, if you put a gun to my head now and ask me what my favorite movie is, it's going to be The Terminator, because it was, when you watch it at exactly the right time for it to rewire your brain, even if you're like, what, I guess 6 years old, I don't even remember. But that movie is very influential. And when this podcast comes out, that article will have been released, so I can mention it. There's episode 5 has an article about Skynet, a 2045 reboot of the Terminator franchise, which
that's fun.
So that's what was one of my favorite articles to write, where as I was creating the world of neurocracy, I sort of Like came to me instantly the idea for how a Terminator movie could work with the fiction of neurocracy, and then I just decided like, okay, I'll just make it a movie that exists in that world, and now it's one of my favorite articles on there.
Thank you so much
Well,
for.
thank you so much.
No, you go ahead.
I finished saying thank you so much. Please, you.
Thank you so much for joining us. It was a real treat to speak with you.
Well, it was a real treat to be here. Thank you so much for indulging me to this extent, and yeah, thank you for having me.